Did you know that the greenhouse effect of global gas emissions per kilometer on the railway transport is 80% less than the cars? Welcome to Eco Africa. I am Sandra Twinovideo here in Kampala, Uganda. And with me is my co-host. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Sandra. My name is Chris Elems here in Lagos, Nigeria. And I'm glad to have you with us for another edition of our Environment Show with a focus on Africa and Europe. Here are some of the topics coming up. What does expanding rail networks mean for people and the environment? Who's dealing with the millions of coronavirus masks that have been discarded? And what happens to ethnic groups who are driven out of their home territory? In most African countries, buses or 2 to 3-wheeled motor taxis form the backbone of public transport. Developed environmentally friendly rail or express bus networks are hard to find, whether in big cities or elsewhere. Trains account for less than 20% of the transport industry. According to a study by the African Development Bank, passenger rail makes up an even smaller proportion. Now, Kenya is one of the few African countries that has started to rethink trains, and Eco Africa went along for a ride on the new routes between Nairobi and Mombasa.
Twice a day, the Mombasa-Nairobi Standard Gauge Railway, or SGR, shuttles passengers between Kenya's Indian Ocean port of Mombasa and the capital. It's a 5-hour trip. A one-way ticket costs logistics manager Peter Maruti 1,000 Kenyan shillings, the equivalent of about €8. A bus would be more expensive and take twice as long.
It's so organized. The way the railways do operate, you feel like you are really traveling. It's not the case whereby you go take a matatu, which is there's so much disorganized and the stuff.
The connection has been running for 4 years. It's Kenya's only modern rail link and still highly controversial. Most African countries, including Kenya, rely primarily on roads for transportation, whether by automobile, bus or truck. It's a key sector on which many others depend, but also a major threat to the climate. Kenya's Transport Ministry has calculated that the country's transportation sector pumped out over 12 megatons of CO2 in 2019. That's 40% more than in 2010.
Greenhouse gas emission, particularly carbon dioxide, is toxic. It can affect your health, public health. It affects respiratory systems. Along the road, there are many people who have respiratory problems. If Kenya does not decarbonize, the area will become much hotter, much drier. This kind of vegetation will give way to even more sparse vegetation. And wild animals will either die, or those which can afford to migrate to other areas.
Compared to road transport, railway greenhouse gas emissions are almost negligible. But the Mombasa-Nairobi rail link hasn't lowered national emissions in any meaningful way since it was opened. It's only managed to halt their steady increase. And that's even though 1.5 million passengers use the connection every year. 1.5 million who aren't clogging up the roads. Rail freight can claim a similar success. This train is hauling 108 40-foot containers, replacing exactly that number of trucks. Peter Maruti imports electrical gadgets from Taiwan and China for sale throughout Kenya. He wants to see even more traffic diverted onto the rails.
The cost of bringing maybe a trailer from Mombasa to Nairobi, it's around 120,000, one trailer. But for railway transport, it's relatively cheaper. The next thing is convenience, because time really matters in business. If you look at the time that's normally taken to take a trailer from Mombasa to Nairobi, it's around 12 hours. For train, 4 to 6 hours. You see, it's a win-win situation for the businesses.
But the truckers aren't as upbeat. Some don't even see an environmental benefit.
SGR hasn't helped in reducing pollution. What it has done is create unemployment.
Whether it's night or day, emissions are the same.
After 20 years running buses, Farooq Sahid is now struggling.
We used to have about 3-4 buses a day. Now we are just sending about 2 buses. Compared to the transport sector, SGR, they are sending almost those cabins, about 13-14 cabins, which consist of about 1,000 passengers. And we are carrying almost 20 passengers, which is a big impact for us.
The economy was the chief driver between the Mombasa-Nairobi SGR railway. Construction costs are said to have topped €3 billion, 90% of it financed by China to further its African activities. It's Kenya's biggest single infrastructure project since independence. It's also one that's had the most impact on the country's ecosystem. The almost 500-kilometre link passes through several wildlife reserves, from the Nairobi National Park to the Tsavo Wildlife Reserve outside Mombasa. Tobias Nayumba is an environmental analyst who studies the effects of major developments throughout the parks. He says the projects have had a serious impact on ecosystems and also on species diversity.
For example, in the Voi area where it bisects the Tsavo East and Tsavo West, what it has done is to impede the movement of wildlife between the two areas. With specific reference to the Nairobi National Park, we are seeing a situation where wildlife is migrating back into community areas. They then engage in human-wildlife conflict.
But the parks have benefited economically from the rail link. The town of Voi is a major stopover for tourists heading to the Tsavo East and Tsavo West national parks. They're home to an important remnant population of tuskers, elephants whose tusks touch the ground. Thousands of tourists go on safari here every year.
And now with the SGR, as tourism players, we're actually very happy to have it. It's something that has really opened up domestic tourism. It offers a very efficient service, a very affordable service, clean and with good standards.
Peter Maruti has arrived in Mombasa to oversee his latest consignment. A third of all freight arriving here could be forwarded by rail, though for the time being, no further than Nairobi. But plans for an extension are underway. A new connection already links Nairobi to Naivasha. A further extension is planned to run via Kisumu and Malaba all the way to the Ugandan capital Kampala. Railways could offer a long-term solution to the pollution caused by Kenya's freight and passenger transportation industries. But many more hundreds of kilometres of tracks will be needed if the country is to achieve its emissions reduction goals by 2030.
There is no doubt that decarbonizing the transportation sector would create a cleaner, healthier, and more affordable future in Africa. Speaking of clean and healthy, have you ever wondered what happens to all the face masks that have been used and then disposed of since the start of the pandemic, especially those in medical centers? Here is one solution from the UK. Take a look.
This bluish-purplish goo is the product of these medical face masks made of polypropylene.
On our environment.
Masks have played a major role in controlling the pandemic. But they've also caused environmental damage, often ending up in oceans where they threaten marine life. It takes at least 300 years for the material to decompose. At present, an estimated 1.6 million tons of masks are disposed of every day. And while it may not be CO2 neutral, recycling is better than dumping or burning. This machine, made by a British company, melts masks at 350 degrees Celsius to produce a material that can be used to make new products.
Post-process of the machine, you get these 20-kilogram blocks of pure polypropylene. They are totally inert, sterile, and are ready to go to the upward recycling industries. School chairs, the injection molding industry have taken them for school chairs. Builders' buckets.
The plan is to give disposable gloves and coronavirus test kits the same treatment. A further step towards reducing pandemic-derived trash.
And how about you? If you're also doing your bit, tell us about it. Visit our website or send us a tweet. #DoingYourBit. We share your stories.
Now let's take a look at how South Africa is dealing with its waste problem. Separating garbage there is rare, and more than 90% of general waste ends up in landfill sites.
But that will soon be a thing of the past. In 2020, the National Waste Management Strategy was reworked and now aims to reduce the social and environmental impacts of waste. More private initiatives with the goals of reusing, repairing and recycling will contribute to the solution, just like the startup Regionize from Cape Town.
Ursula Barents is sorting and packing up her waste plastic from the past week in time for a special pickup service. Recycling household trash is still the exception here in Cape Town. Ursula Barents only started separating her paper and plastic recently as part of a pilot project.
I never realized, how bad things was until I started saving plastic. I've never thought about it, but I'm so glad to be doing my bit.
And every little bit counts. Currently, just 7.5% of South Africans recycle their waste. The result is mountains of plastic and other refuse across the country. Until now, the only form of household waste recycling here was done by informal waste collectors. Chad Robertson decided to take action.
So right here we've got a lot of illegal dumping, quite a big issue in the city of Cape Town. According to some stats, we're spending around 400 million rand a year on illegal dumping and cleaning it up. Whereas, we could be spending that money on rather creating solutions to solve this problem.
Right behind the landfill, there's a no dumping sign.
Yeah, very ironic. It's actually not very ironic because at most dumping sites you will see a no dumping sign. So it's quite a norm for us here in Cape Town.
Chad Robertson wants to encourage Cape Towners to bring about change. His Regionize startup is primarily aimed at people from the poorest parts of the city. South Africa is a very unequal society, and that extends to waste disposal.
If you're in a low-income community, for example, there's really nothing available for you besides the informal collectors who would collect the recyclables, because the private companies wouldn't operate there, nor would the city's free service operate there. As I mentioned, that's only in your upper-income communities.
Regionize, which he founded to help resolve Cape Town's waste problem, is located in the Bridgetown suburb in the east of the city. In 2018, the startup launched a pilot project here, tailored to the needs of lower-income areas. Zichla and Ziva Mafume begin their shift at the collection point. While one starts sifting through and sorting the items from the past week, the other sets off on his cargo trike. Siva Mavume does a tour of the neighborhood once a week. The service is a new one for the residents of Bridgetown. Siva Mavume collects paper, plastic, and cans from participants. Meanwhile, 500 households are taking part. Today, he'll stop by 150 homes. He makes a careful note of how much each sack weighs. His trike's cargo cage fills up quickly. Residents involved in the pilot project aren't charged for the pickup service. To the contrary, participants all receive a fixed sum in Rimali for each waste pickup. Rimali is a virtual currency that can be saved up and then spent on shopping, vouchers, mobile phone data packages, and donations.
Thank you so much. Yay! I money to buy dog food, so this can go towards the dog food because it's so expensive.
Siva Mavume makes his way back to the depot. The project provides jobs for people who used to be informal trash collectors and unemployed young people like Siva Mavume. His colleagues bring the sorted reusable materials to a recycling plant where the waste is turned into a new resource. Ursula Barnes is a convert. She's happy about the vouchers, but even happier that she's now doing something about the waste problem.
People will come to realize that we all need to do something to make the change. Be the change you want to see. Be the change. And I'm glad that I got started. Late in life, but I got started. Rather late than never.
Did you know that there are seal species that can't stay underwater for 2 hours without having to come up for air? In total, there are more than 30 different species all over the world. They spend their lives in water and on land or on ice. In some cases, one very rare species that can be found in a particular area of Finland, way up in Northern Europe. It is a pleasant place, but not always safe for these aquatic mammals.
Eva is probably the most unusual ringed seal in Lake Saimaa. For years, Risto Eronen has been keeping an eye out for her. Unlike her fellow ringed seals who stay underwater for extended periods, Eva spends a lot of time at the surface, and it's for a tragic reason.
Eva's injured. Most likely it's because of a fishing hook in her throat. She got caught on a line. And around that same time in spring, she started making heavy wheezing sounds. Now Eva has to spend lots of time on the surface taking in oxygen.
Finland is known as the land of 1,000 lakes. Lake Saimaa, in the country's southeast, is the largest of them and covers over 4,500 square kilometres. The Saimaa ringed seal, which takes its name from its ring-patterned fur, can only be found here. The species is endangered. Only 400 of them remain. Global warming has made it harder for them. The seals need ice and snow to build their breeding layers. But the biggest threat is fishing. The lake is populated with vendace, a small whitefish that's a popular summertime delicacy in Finland. But big nylon nets like these pose a danger to seal pups, which easily get tangled up in them. To protect them when they're very small, there's a moratorium on fishing with nets between April and June every year. But in summertime, the ban is lifted because thousands of tourists want to go fishing. Environmental activists have launched a public awareness campaign encouraging people to take an interest in the seal's welfare. These fishing enthusiasts are signing a pledge that they will cease fishing with nets. In return, they're given fish traps. They've been designed so as not to pose a threat to the seal pups.
There's a very strong desire among people across Finland and in Saimaa especially to protect the seal. And as the amount of information has increased in recent years, more people know about it. But that has also meant that more people want to come to the region to see the animals themselves. So there's a constant balancing act.
At this event, 100 fishing enthusiasts pledged to stop net fishing and swapped their tackle for fish traps. It's a start at least, and Eva? Well, she's quite experienced in dealing with fishing gear and hopefully won't pick up any more injuries.
A healthy ecosystem is vital for life on our planet. It protects biodiversity, helps fight climate change and creates the living conditions people need.
That's right, Sandra, and we should take care of it. If things continue, current numbers suggest that by 2050, more than 90% of the Earth's land will be degraded. What would happen if we had to flee from our home environments? If we could no longer practice our traditions and live how we wanted? Well, the Pygmy people in southern Cameroon know how it feels.
We left our village and came across the river to harvest the honey. My brother was passing by when he saw the bees flying to the tree, and he let us know.
For the Baka people, who were once referred to as pygmies, the forest has always given them everything they needed to live. One of their staple foods is honey from wild bees. A nest like this is enough to satisfy the whole group for a day. But these trips into the forest are actually not allowed. The protected area in and around the reserve has been strictly controlled, and that has pushed the families further and further out of the territory.
Now we have to grow food here, and we don't know why. We don't have any form of health services either. We take care of things in our traditional ways.
Like these women, who know exactly where to find roots and plants that can be used in medicinal practices. In 1987, this region was granted UNESCO World Heritage status. In total, it's nearly the size of all of Gambia in West Africa. The biosphere boasts a huge diversity of species and is home to endangered animals such as the giant pangolin and leopards. But the pressure on the protected area has increased. 10 years ago, the Cameroon government set aside part of the forests around the reserve for industrial use. Jungle where the Baka once settled was cleared to make way for thousands of new rubber trees. A company from Singapore has been harvesting that raw material for the global market. So far, around 10,000 hectares have been turned into plantations. That's the equivalent of 14,000 football pitches cut out right in the middle of the jungle, says conservationist Renes Jija. For the families of the Baka, who are now expelled, it's simply incomprehensible.
These communities are not only losing their livelihood, by having their way of life being completely turned upside down, they're losing their cultural customs. They no longer have access to their spiritual places, very closely connected to the forest.
A social and environmental plan obliges the company to ensure sustainable operations and to create jobs for the local population. But many of the company's employees are not from here or do not belong to the Baka people. The company's management emphasizes that it acts in an environmentally conscious way. It collects rainwater, uses solar energy, and recycles the water used in production.
The pollution of streams and rivers is increasing, especially those that are used by the locals for everyday use. This comes from the chemical agents used by the company, but also from the work recently done during the construction of the factory.
So far, Sudcam, a local branch of the company, has only used 1/3 of the original forest area that was assigned to it by the authorities. Now, further expansion has been stopped, also in part because international development funds were withdrawn. And Greenpeace, UNESCO, and some local environmental groups have been putting pressure on the company.
We have not gone in for any critics to be basically to say that it's because of somebody or some NGOs, to be precise, have forced us to do it. No, it is something our own conscience has told us to stop it. And we continue by the commitment of zero deforestation ahead as well.
Nicorine Noir from the local conservation agency visits Baka settlements on a regular basis. She tries to explain to residents why these forests are protected and why they're no longer allowed in. But the locals don't understand.
Yes, some of our children are going to school now, but there's no work here and a lot of poverty. I hope they appreciate the Baka situation because we're not doing well here.
Later, the forest honey helps improve the mood. The children, in particular, are happy to get something sweet. For the Baka people, whose families have had to retreat far from the reserve, there is only one way they could resettle in the woods. if the rubber company were to allow them back into the parts of the forest surrounding the reserve that it's not using itself.
So one important way to preserve our ecosystems is to respect and support indigenous cultures. I hope you enjoyed our program and that you've learned something new about your environment. Goodbye from me, Nigeria. I'm Chris Lems, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Chris. It is a goodbye from me too here in Uganda. We'll be back next week with more inspiring stories on how we can make our planet a better place to live. See you next time. Bye-bye.